South Park emotional moments. South Park was never supposed to make you feel anything, until it did. Somewhere between the crude jokes and the chaos, the show started showing cracks. Fathers breaking down, teachers losing themselves, marriages collapsing in silence. These weren't just episodes, they were confessions from the people writing them. Moments where the satire dropped its mask and the pain finally spoke. For years, Kenny's death was a running joke. He'd die, the boys would shout, and by next week, he'd be back. But in Season 5, Episode 13, that punchline stopped being funny. Kenny Dies wasn't written for laughs. Trey Parker said he wanted people to feel sick. This time, there was no reset, no quick comeback. Kenny was dying for real from a terminal illness. It was the first time South Park dropped its armor and showed something raw. The episode aired in December 2001, just months after 9/11, when America was already reeling from death on a national scale. That timing hit harder than anyone expected. The storyline took another turn no one saw coming. Cartman, the show's most selfish character, stood in front of Congress begging to legalize stem cell research. Viewers thought it was satire. It wasn't. Parker had watched the real congressional hearings that same year where lawmakers argued about morality while kids with terminal diseases sat in the audience. The writers didn't exaggerate a thing. They just replayed the absurdity of real life. And then they did something almost unheard of in South Park's sound design. They stripped away the music. No score, no punchy transitions, just silence and breathing. When Kenny finally dies, the scene plays out with that eerie emptiness. It didn't feel like animation anymore. It felt human. Fans didn't know how to react. Some thought it was a prank, expecting Kenny to pop back up the next episode. When he didn't, forums filled with grief. Even the crew called it our first funeral. Years later, Parker admitted the episode wasn't about death. It was about growing up in a world where jokes can't fix everything. South Park's world cracked that night, and through it came something it never showed before: sincerity. That emotional honesty carried into another episode from the same year, Butter's very own episode. On the surface, it's one of the funniest, most absurd stories the show ever made, but underneath, it's heartbreak disguised as comedy. Butters, the naive, sweet kid who always tried to please everyone, spends the episode discovering that his perfect parents are frauds. His dad sneaks into gay bathhouses, his mom covers it up with lies. In the end, he's kidnapped, nearly drowned, and left to walk home alone while cheerful music plays. It feels wrong, because it's supposed to. Trey Parker later said the story was inspired by a real Colorado news case from the late 1990s about a missing child whose parents fabricated alibis. We rewrote it as comedy because reality was darker, he admitted. Butters became the embodiment of innocence in a world that doesn't deserve it. His little line, "Oh, hamburgers," started as a joke, a nervous tick borrowed from a crew member who stuttered during an emotional breakdown in the studio. It became Butters' shield, his way of surviving embarrassment and pain. The final shot, him walking alone, pretending everything's fine, was the first time South Park experimented with emotional dissonance. You're laughing, but your stomach turns. That moment cemented Butters as more than comic relief. He was the only one who still had hope, even when no one else did. And then there's Eric Cartman, the character who redefined evil in animation. In Scott Tenorman Must Die from Season 5, Parker and Stone crossed a line most shows would never dare touch. On paper, it's revenge comedy. A cruel older kid scams Cartman out of money, so he retaliates. But the twist, when Cartman feeds Scott chili made from his own parents, changed television forever. It was monstrous, yes, but it was also tragic. The writers later admitted the script drew on real case files about child sociopathy. Cartman wasn't meant to be a villain. He was a symptom, the product of total neglect, zero empathy, and a culture that laughs at cruelty until it becomes normal. The episode's final frame, Cartman licking tears off Scott's face, wasn't just horror. It was an autopsy of childhood broken beyond repair. Years later, in episode 201, when Cartman finally hears his father might be dead, he breaks down for the first time. That moment connects all the dots. The endless cruelty, the empty home, the desperate need to matter. South Park didn't excuse him. It just showed the cost of being raised without love. By 2011, the show had already mocked everything. Religion, politics, celebrities. But in You're Getting Old, it turned inward. Stan starts hearing every song, every conversation, every word as shit, literally. Every sound becomes noise. That wasn't metaphor. The audio engineers actually mixed the episode with brown noise frequencies that cause real discomfort. Trey Parker said he wrote it during his divorce, when everything felt gray, like the show was falling apart with me. The script became his therapy, his confession disguised as satire. Midway through the episode, a montage rolls over Fleetwood Mac's Landslide. The song wasn't planned, the rights weren't cleared. But when Stevie Nicks saw the unfinished episode, she personally gave approval, calling it one of the most honest uses of our song I've ever seen. It fits too well, a grown man realizing he's too old for what he built. The episode ends without a reset, without a punchline. Stan's parents separate, his friends drift away. And the next season doesn't erase it. It continues. That was the first time South Park let pain exist beyond a single week. For a show built on shock and satire, these moments changed everything. When Kenny stopped coming back, when Butters stopped smiling, when Cartman stopped being funny, and when Stan stopped pretending, South Park stopped being just a comedy. It became a reflection of its creator's exhaustion, heartbreak, and strange hope that even in chaos, emotion still cuts through the noise. By the time Tegrity Farms hit screens in 2018, Randy Marsh wasn't a side character anymore, yay. He had become a mirror. His breakdown wasn't random, and it wasn't funny in the way South Park fans were used to. The episode was written right after the 2016 US election, a moment Trey Parker later described as creative exhaustion disguised as comedy. The team had been running for 20 seasons without pause, and Parker admitted the tone of the writing room had shifted. They were burnt out, cynical, and questioning their own place in the chaos. Randy, the suburban dad spiraling into absurd ventures, became their stand-in. The Tegrity Farms storyline turned Randy's midlife crisis into a national satire. On paper, he was chasing money by selling marijuana. Beneath that, he was unraveling. Every monologue about integrity was actually an identity crisis, a man desperate to believe he still had purpose. Earlier seasons had already hinted at his self-destruction. In Bloody Mary, 2005, Randy's drinking problem was treated like a joke, but Parker later revealed it was rooted in veterans' dependency cases he read from Denver VA hospital records. Those transcripts, men confessing how alcohol replaced therapy, shaped Randy's storyline more than fans ever realized. Even his famous outburst, "I thought this was America," wasn't written from thin air. The phrase came directly from a Denver Police Department arrest transcript that one of the producers found in 2004. It belonged to a man arrested for fighting outside a baseball game. His drunken defense was verbatim what Randy shouts in the episode. The real-life absurdity of that line made it into South Park, and it stuck. Over the years, Randy became less of a character and more of a vessel for the writer's own fear of mediocrity. Every business scheme, every moral crusade, every meltdown about society, it was creative projection wrapped in slapstick. By Tegrity Farms, that projection reached its breaking point. Randy wasn't just a dad losing control, he was the writer's embodiment of burnout, a man laughing through his own collapse. Mr. Garrison's story followed a different path, one that went from parody to confession. Before his transition arc, Parker described him as a parody of hate until we realized he represented confusion more than ideology. That shift began around 2005 with Follow That Egg, an episode that looked like classroom satire but was built on gender political grief. In the script, Garrison argues with himself about equality while teaching kids a lesson he doesn't understand. What began as a joke about hypocrisy became one of the show's most quietly painful moments. A man at war with his identity in front of children who think he's a teacher. Behind the curtain, the writers weren't laughing either. By the time Garrison's character mirrored Donald Trump in 2016, the hate mail started pouring in, real letters accusing the creators of mocking both sides. It got personal. According to interviews, Parker and Stone debated cutting the storyline entirely after staff members reported getting harassed online. But instead of dropping it, they turned Garrison into a case study of trauma. When he finally returns to the classroom after the Trump arc, his line, "I just want to teach again," isn't political. It's post-traumatic. The dialogue reads like someone trying to rebuild normalcy after years of chaos. Garrison stopped being satire. He became the show's unspoken study of what happens when ideology and identity crush the same person. The show's emotional realism reached its peak with the Randy and Sharon divorce arc that began in You're Getting Old and stretched through Asperger's. For the first time, South Park didn't reset. The marriage actually fell apart. Parker and Stone later admitted it was the only time they cried while writing. Sharon's quiet monologue, "Everything is just the same," wasn't fiction. It came directly from a letter a fan had mailed to the studio months earlier, describing her depression and how nothing feels new anymore. They used her words almost verbatim. It turned a cartoon marriage into something uncomfortably real. In those years, the show evolved from mockery into vulnerability. Randy's self-destruction mirrored the writer's exhaustion. Garrison's identity war exposed their creative confusion. And Sharon's quiet collapse carried the emotional weight they had avoided for 15 years. Each storyline bled into the next, building continuity not just in plot, but in pain. What began as a cartoon about chaos became a long-running portrait of emotional survival, disguised as satire, delivered with laughter, but written from the edge of breakdown.